You want to know what 17 years of my life looks like? It looks like a spaghetti bowl of heavy-gauge copper wire, thousands of gallons of dielectric oil, and a constant low-frequency hum that vibrates right into your molars even when you are trying to catch a few hours of sleep. My name is Oliver. I am 48 years old. I do not have a fancy title that fits on a corporate bio without looking like a scramble of meaningless acronyms. But for 17 long years, I have been the chief industrial power systems engineer for a massive alloy refinery on the Pacific coast that eats electricity the way a starving wolf devours a fresh kill. I am the reason the lights do not flicker when the massive arc furnaces kick on. I am the reason the primary transformer did not turn into a jagged smoking crater during the massive grid collapse 5 years ago. I am the quiet, unappreciated spine of this massive operation. The guys on the floor, big, burly men with welding scars and backs that pop when they stand up, do not call general maintenance when the hum of the turbines changes pitch. They call me. They know that if Oliver is walking slowly with a cup of black coffee, the world is still turning. If Oliver is running, you had better find a thick concrete wall and start praying to whatever deity you ignored last Sunday. The air conditioner in the room hummed loudly. It was a cheap, rattling sound. I knew exactly which fan belt was loose in the vent. I could have fixed it in 5 minutes with a simple screwdriver and a small piece of rubber. As I looked at Julian, finally raising his eyes with that bored, arrogant glaze, I decided the annoying noise was incredibly fitting. It was the sound of things slowly falling apart, and I was about to be the one pulling the final pin. The conference room was not empty. That was the first major violation of the unwritten corporate code. When you fire someone like me, someone who has been a core part of the foundation since the concrete was first poured, you do it in private. You do it with a firm handshake and a polite lie about going in a different direction. You absolutely do not do it in front of a live audience. But Julian, in his infinite youthful wisdom, had turned this into a spectator sport. Sitting around the long, expensive mahogany table were all the department heads, sales, logistics, human resources, and 3 of those fresh-faced efficiency consultants who looked like they were barely out of college. They were tapping away on their expensive tablets, probably calculating how much money they would save on cheap coffee filters if they fired the night janitors. When I walked in, the typing stopped completely. The silence was thick, sticky, and smelled strongly of cheap cologne and corporate fear. "Oliver, have a seat," Julian said smoothly, gesturing to the uncomfortable chair at the far end of the table. He was sitting at the head, naturally, flanked by a massive projector screen displaying a graph with a thick red line plummeting like a stone in water. The title of the slide was Legacy Costs and Operational Drag. I remained standing tall. I prefer to stand, Julian. My knees lock up if I sit in cheap chairs for too long. A nervous titter ran through the room. Beatrice from Human Resources looked like she desperately wanted to swallow her own tongue. Julian's perfect smile tightened, the edges cracking just a tiny bit. "Suit yourself," he said coldly, tapping a key on his sleek laptop. The slide instantly changed. It was a detailed breakdown of my personal salary, my health benefits, and the overtime costs of my entire engineering team. It was projected there in high resolution for everyone to see. It was a gross violation of standard privacy, but Julian did not care about privacy. He cared strictly about dominance. As you can all clearly see, Julian began addressing the room rather than me directly. "The engineering oversight department is bleeding us dry. We are paying a massive premium for manual intervention in an age of total automation. I have had the consultants run a full audit. Their conclusion is that the current grid management can be handled entirely by our existing software, with a simple, cheap remote monitoring contract." He looked at me then, his eyes gleaming with the toxic triumph of a man who thinks he has just slain a mighty dragon. In reality, he had just kicked a sleeping bear. "Oliver, effective immediately, your position is being permanently eliminated. We are moving to a fully cloud-based monitoring solution." "Cloud-based," I repeated slowly, the words tasting like dry ash in my mouth. "You are going to run a massive, complex heavy metals refinery from the cloud. What exactly happens when the internet goes down, Julian? What happens when the network latency hits 500 milliseconds and the phase synchronization drifts completely out of alignment? That is exactly what the redundancy protocols are for. One of the young consultants piped up nervously. He had a high, squeaky voice and a tie that was way too wide for his narrow chest. The algorithm handles the latency automatically. I laughed out loud. It was not a nice, friendly laugh. It was a dry, hacking sound that came from the back of my throat. The algorithm? Kid. The algorithm does not know that the number 4 furnace has a tiny hairline fracture in the main induction coil that creates a massive harmonic feedback loop every single time the weather gets cold outside. The algorithm does not know you have to ramp up the voltage incredibly slowly on Tuesdays because the city utility does a grid switch that causes a massive transient spike. That sounds like purely anecdotal evidence, Julian cut in, his voice sharp and defensive. We operate on hard data here, Oliver, not factory folklore. Folklore? I took one heavy step toward the table. The logistics manager actually flinched back in his seat. I have kept this entire place from burning to the ground 3 separate times in the last 12 months alone. You call it folklore, but I call it applied physics. Fire me, and you lose the only translator. The heavy machinery does not speak English, Julian. It speaks raw voltage, and right now it is screaming. Enough. Julian slammed his soft hand loudly on the table. It was a highly theatrical gesture, probably practiced in a mirror. This is not a debate. It is a formal notification. You are done here. Your access badges are revoked as of right now. He checked his watch importantly. Security will safely escort you out of the building. He threw a thick packet of legal papers across the polished wood table. It slid quickly and stopped inches from my hand. Standard severance. 2 weeks of pay for every year served, provided you immediately sign the non-disclosure agreement and the non-disparagement agreement. I looked at the packet. Then I looked directly at Julian. I did not feel sad. I did not feel the crushing weight of sudden unemployment or the rising panic of paying a mortgage. I felt a sudden icy clarity. It was the exact same feeling I got when a massive breaker blew, the immediate calm assessment of the damage, the rapid calculation of the fix. Only this time I was not going to fix it. You think I am expensive? I asked, my voice dropping to a low, steady rumble that commanded the room. Julian, I am the cheapest insurance policy this company ever had. You are trading a veteran firefighter for a cheap smoke detector that is completely out of batteries, I said. Get out! Julian snapped loudly, his face flushing a deep angry red. You are disrupting a highly important meeting. Do not make me call the armed guards. I looked slowly around the room. The sales manager was staring intently at his expensive shoes. Beatrice was pretending to take detailed notes on a completely blank legal pad. Nobody moved an inch. Nobody spoke up. 17 years of keeping their lights on, keeping their paychecks clearing by ensuring the valuable product flowed out the door, and not a single one of them had the spine to say that maybe they should not fire the wizard who keeps the entire tower standing. Fine, I said calmly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my plastic key card. It was worn smooth, the edges cracked, the lanyard stained with years of grease. I tossed it onto the table. It landed with a sharp plastic clack that sounded louder than a gunshot in the perfectly quiet room. I will leave, I said, but I am taking my property with me. Julian frowned, confused. Your property? We will box up your desk items and mail them to you. I am not talking about my coffee mug, Julian. I am talking about my intellectual property. The Grid Whisperer software suite. The custom diagnostic patches that have been keeping your ancient logic controllers from crashing every single day for the past 10 years. I wrote that code on my own time. I own the federal copyright to it. Under Section 106 of the United States Copyright Act, I have the exclusive right to authorize its use. When your Uncle Elias was in charge, I granted the company a revocable license to use it, strictly contingent on my continued employment. Since you just terminated my employment, I am officially revoking that software license, effective immediately. Julian stared at me, then let out a short, barking laugh. You are bluffing. The company owns everything on those servers. You should have your highly paid legal team check the original contract from 10 years ago, I replied smoothly. It is all there in black and white. If you continue to run my proprietary code after I walk out that door, you are committing willful federal copyright infringement. And since you are doing it to operate heavy industrial machinery, I could also probably loop in the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act for unauthorized access to my licensed system. The statutory damages alone would dwarf my entire severance package. So, I am going to log in one last time, completely remove my proprietary code from your servers, and then you can let your amazing cloud algorithm handle the raw, unpatched grid data. You cannot do that, one of the consultants yelled, his face turning pale. If you remove those stabilization patches, the phase variance will cause the main breakers to trip within minutes. That sounds like a severe operational drag, I said, mocking Julian's slide title. Not my problem anymore. I pulled out my phone, opened my secure remote access app, and entered my master credentials. I executed the uninstallation script I had prepared weeks ago when I first saw the writing on the wall. The script systematically scrubbed my proprietary code from every single logic controller in the facility. "What did you just do?" Julian demanded, standing up from his chair. "I just took back what legally belongs to me," I said, putting my phone back in my pocket. "Let me give you one piece of completely free consulting, since you clearly love consultants so much." I leaned in, placing my large callus-hardened hands on the back of the empty chair. "The arc furnaces," I said softly. "They run on a heavily buffered power supply. That buffer was actively calibrated every 4 hours by my software to account for the massive municipal grid drift. I just deleted that software. In exactly 12 minutes, the unpatched drift will violently exceed the absolute safety threshold. Your automated cloud system will frantically try to correct it, but it will fail because it does not understand the latency of your ancient hardware." Julian rolled his eyes dismissively. "We have excellent maintenance crews, Oliver. We are not helpless without you." "The maintenance crews fix broken physical gears," I said quietly. "They do not touch the core logic controllers because they are utterly terrified of them." "You have 12 minutes, Julian. If that phase drift is not perfectly corrected manually, the safety interlocks will trip hard. Power to the massive pots will instantly cut. And in 20 minutes after that, well, I sincerely hope you like incredibly expensive modern art because you are going to have 85 massive solid metal statues. Get out." Julian pointed a violently shaking finger at the door. I straightened up. I adjusted my flannel collar. I looked him dead in the exact center of his eyes. "Good luck with the synergy," I said. I turned and walked slowly out. I did not look back. I could feel all of their eyes burning into my back. But as I hit the main hallway, the cool industrial air hit my face, and I smiled, a real, genuine, terrifying smile, because I knew something they completely failed to grasp. I had not just left. I had left a ticking time bomb of pure physics, and the only person who possessed the unique knowledge to stop it was currently walking toward the parking lot and getting ready to watch their corporate world burn from a very safe, legal distance. The walk from the administration building to the parking lot usually takes about 5 minutes. I purposefully took 10. I wanted to soak it all in. The steady rhythm of the place, the deep thrum of the stamping presses in Building 3, the sharp hiss of the steam release valves. It was a beautiful industrial symphony I conducted for 17 years, and now I was dropping the baton and walking completely off the stage. I unlocked my old truck and climbed inside. I tossed my bag into the passenger seat. As I started the engine, I saw the head of security doing his rounds in a small cart. He waved happily at me. He had no idea his arrogant boss had just fired the only person keeping the facility alive. "Leaving early today, Oliver?" he called out. "Yes, taking a permanent vacation," I shouted back over the loud engine. Julian's explicit orders. I peeled slowly out of the lot. I did not speed. I drove the exact speed limit, obeying every single traffic law perfectly. I wanted to be miles away when the massive alarm started blaring. I checked the dashboard clock. It was exactly 11:42 in the morning. The error validation would take 3 minutes. The trip sequence would take 2 minutes. 11:52 was the exact time of death. I reached for a cigarette, lit it, and took a drag deep enough to fill my lungs with smoke. It tasted incredibly like total freedom. My phone buzzed loudly in the cup holder. I glanced down at it. It was a frantic text from my former assistant. "Oliver, where are you? The voltage monitors are acting completely crazy. The frequency is oscillating wildly. Should I call you?" I did not reply. I picked up the phone, held it for a brief second, and then I completely powered it off. I turned onto the main highway. The massive refinery was just a gray smudge in my rearview mirror now, billowing thick white steam into the clear blue sky. It looked perfectly peaceful and industrious. "You have 10 minutes left," I said to the reflection in the mirror. "Better start heating up the heavy crowbars, Julian. You are going to need them to pry your entire career out of the solid concrete." I did not go home. Home is far too quiet. Instead, I pulled into a small dive bar about 5 miles up the road that smelled strongly of stale beer and old regrets. It was noon on a Tuesday, so the entire clientele consisted of just me, a guy who looked like he had been sleeping in his car for a decade, and the tired bartender. "Afternoon, Oliver," she said, wiping a dirty rag across the bar. "A bit early for the heavy stuff, is it not?" "I am celebrating," I said, sliding onto a worn stool. "Give me a Boilermaker, cheap whiskey, and keep them coming." "Celebrate what exactly?" "Retirement," I said smoothly. "Involuntary, but highly effective immediately." She raised a painted eyebrow, but poured the shot anyway. I downed it quickly. The sharp burn was grounding. I placed my powered-off phone on the bar. I knew exactly what was happening right now without needing to look. At 11:55, inside the plant, the bright lights in the main hall would be flickering. Not a strobe, but a subtle, terrifying dimming, like the massive building was gasping for air. The heavy motors, the crushers, the long conveyors would be violently changing pitch. The smooth, deep hum would be turning into a jagged, grinding whine as the electrical frequencies slipped from a perfect 60 Hz to a jagged 58.5. On the factory floor, the guys would be looking up in terror. They would feel it vibrating in their heavy boots. At 11:58 in the main control room, the loud alarms would finally start screaming. First, the yellow warnings. Voltage sag detected. Harmonic distortion critically high. My former assistant would be clicking frantically, desperately trying to find the manual override command. But the override command was gone, safely stored on my encrypted home server, protected by federal copyright law. Julian would be in his plush office completely unaware until the lights completely went out. At exactly 12 noon, the main bus would trip. The power to the massive smelting pots would cut instantly. The magnetic fields would violently collapse, and the molten metal would stop churning and begin to settle. I turned my phone back on just to watch the show. It immediately started dancing across the sticky wooden bar, vibrating furiously. I had 25 missed calls. My inbox was flooded with desperate texts that were rapidly devolving from simple confusion to sheer terror. "Oliver, the main bus is tripping. Oliver, pick up. Julian, call me immediately. There is a glitch. Julian, the system is crashing. Fix it right now. Julian, answer the damn phone or I will sue you for everything you own." I chuckled deeply. "Sue me," I muttered, nursing my cold beer. "Good luck serving legal papers when you are the one who actively committed copyright infringement by demanding I leave my software running after terminating my license agreement." The real horror was not the lights going out. The horror was the terrifying reality of the massive smelters. At 20 minutes without power, the thick crust starts to form on top of the molten metal, like skin on a pudding, but this pudding is over 1,000 degrees and hard as solid rock. At 2 hours, the entire pot freezes solid. You cannot just simply melt it again. You have to dismantle the entire massive steel structure, jackhammer out the solidified block of alloy, which completely ruins the expensive ceramic lining, and rebuild the entire thing from scratch. It costs about $450,000 per furnace. We have a line of 85 furnaces. Do the simple math, Julian. That is nearly $38 million in direct hardware replacement alone. Add in the lost production time, the severely missed contracts, the massive penalties for late delivery to the automotive clients, and you are looking at a $75 million crater in the company finances. My phone rang loudly again. It was a video call request from my assistant. I stared at it blankly. I could picture her face, pale, terrified, lit by the flashing red of the alarm strobes. I felt a small twinge of guilt. She was a good kid. She did not deserve this stress, but she also did not have the leverage or the knowledge to fix it. If I answered now, if I walked her through it, Julian would easily claim it was just a minor glitch. He would spin it to the board of directors. He would say they handled it perfectly, and I would still be fired, and the plant would still be doomed eventually. To cure the deep infection, you have to let the fever burn hot. I let it ring straight to voicemail. Suddenly, the small television in the corner of the bar cut to a breaking news banner. Emergency crews responding to smoke reported at the Pacific Coast Alloy Refinery. It was not a fire. It was the emergency venting system kicking in. When the pots lose massive power, they release thick black smoke. The Environmental Protection Agency absolutely hates that. Looks like the synergy just hit the fan, I said softly, raising my glass to the television screen where a helicopter shot showed my life's work venting angry black clouds into the atmosphere. At 12:45, a sleek black town car screeched into the gravel lot of the dive bar. I watched calmly through the grimy window. It was not Julian. It was Elias, the retired founder and chairman of the board. He burst into the dark bar, looking like a man who had just been told his entire life legacy was literally on fire. He spotted me immediately and marched over, smelling of expensive golf course sweat and pure panic. "Oliver," he gasped, completely out of breath. "You have to come back right now." I did not turn around. I kept watching the news report. "Get in line, Elias. I am enjoying my generous severance package." "Severance?" Elias grabbed my broad shoulder. I spun slowly on the stool and firmly knocked his hand away. "Oliver, the potline is cooling rapidly. The internal temperature is dropping fast. We have maybe 20 minutes before the crust is too thick to break manually." "Sounds like a severe management problem," I said coldly. "Julian explicitly told me the modern automation would handle everything. He has a brilliant cloud-based solution." "Julian is a complete moron," Elias shouted loudly. "We fired him." "You fired him?" I raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Who fired me, Elias? You signed off on the budget cuts. I saw your signature on the quarterly review document. Do not pretend this is all Julian. He pulled the trigger, but you bought him the gun." Elias turned ashen pale. "Oliver, please. We are talking about the entire company, the jobs. Hundreds of people work there. If those pots freeze solid, we close forever. Everyone goes home with nothing. Total bankruptcy." He knew exactly which button to push. I did not give a damn about the wealthy shareholders or Julian's inheritance. But the guys on the floor, the mechanics with families, they did not deserve to lose their livelihoods because of corporate stupidity. "I want it in writing," I said firmly. "What?" "I want a legally binding contract. Independent consultant status. I want my old salary quadrupled. I want a 10-year ironclad guarantee and full, unquestioned operational autonomy. No more suits in my control room. No more efficiency experts. I run the grid. Period. Furthermore, Julian is permanently banned from the premises." Elias nodded frantically. "Immediately. I will write it on a napkin if I must do it." "Not a napkin. Electronic signature from the legal department. Sent directly to my personal email. Right now." He fumbled desperately for his phone and dialed his legal team, screaming orders. 2 minutes later, my phone pinged with an email containing the emergency consulting agreement. I scanned it quickly. The terms were all there. "One more thing," I said, standing up to my full height. "I want Julian to be the one who meets me at the front gate. I want him to escort me to the control room, and I want him to apologize to me loudly in front of everyone." Elias gritted his teeth. "Fine, just get in the car." The ride back was incredibly fast. When we pulled up to the main gate, it was pure chaos. Fire trucks, ambulances on standby, and a massive crowd of confused workers standing in the parking lot. And there he was, Julian. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 2 hours. His expensive tie was completely undone, his hair was a messy disaster, and he was holding a yellow hard hat like a pathetic shield. I stepped out of the car and walked up to the locked gate. I waited. Elias nudged Julian hard. "I am sorry, Oliver," he mumbled weakly. "I cannot hear you over the sound of $75 million melting into slag," I said loudly, cupping my ear. "I am incredibly sorry," he screamed, his voice cracking with humiliation. "I was wrong. You were completely right. Please just fix it." I looked at the workers gathered behind the fence. They were all watching intently. I gave them a subtle nod. "All right," I said, tossing my bag over my shoulder. "Let us go save your uncle's legacy." I walked past him quickly. I did not need to run. I knew exactly how much time I had. Physics does not change just because executives are panicking. I had 12 minutes before the molten alloy hardened past the point of no return. The plant was like a massive tomb. The comforting roar was completely gone, replaced by a terrifying hollow silence and the frantic shouting of desperate men. The intense heat was rising rapidly as the exhaust fans failed. I burst into the main control room. It looked like the flight deck of a crashing plane. My assistant was crying, typing useless commands. The consultants were uselessly staring at their phones. "Move," I commanded. The sheer authority in my voice cracked the air like a heavy whip. I slid into my chair, opened the command terminal, and immediately re-uploaded the Grid Whisperer software from my secure cloud backup. The screens flickered and went black for a terrifying second, then popped back up to life. The system was finally stable. Now the hard part. I had to manually synchronize the backup generator to the main bus before I could re-engage the massive grid connection. I watched the phase monitor closely. Two sine waves appeared on the screen. One was the generator, the other was the dead bus. I needed to trick the sensors to override the safety limits. The system flashed a massive warning about catastrophic damage. I bypassed it instantly. The flat line on the screen jumped to life. I watched the frequency numbers intensely. I needed exactly 60.0 hertz. It ticked up slowly. 59.8, 59.9, 60.0. Dead on perfect. "Initiating hard start," I yelled, slamming the enter key. For a second, nothing happened. The silence stretched out thin and screaming. Then, from deep in the bowels of the massive plant, came a sound. It was the sound of a 2,000-amp breaker closing hard. The lights in the control room flared incredibly bright, then dimmed, then steadied. The massive hum returned, starting low in the floorboards and rising to that familiar, beautiful vibration. "We have power," my assistant whispered in total awe. I pushed the power sliders to maximum capacity, dumping massive amounts of energy into the heaters to reverse the cooling process. The alarms screamed about overcurrent, but I ignored them. I watched the temperature graph intently. It was stubborn, sitting at a critical low. Then, slowly, painfully, the curve started to bend upward. The current was biting. The immense heat was soaking back into the metal. The massive beast was finally waking up. My phone pinged with a text from the floor manager. "The crust is breaking. We have good flow." "You did it, boss." I let out a heavy breath. I spun my chair around to face Elias and the pale consultants. "We are perfectly stable," I said quietly. "The potline is secure." The room erupted in cheers, but I just stood up. Julian was standing in the doorway, looking utterly defeated. "Get out of my control room," I told him coldly. He turned and walked away forever. Today, 2 weeks later, the plant is running perfectly. My new contract is securely framed on my office wall. I am officially the new Chief Executive Officer of Operations, making 4 times my old salary, with total autonomous control. The efficiency consultants were permanently banned from the premises. Julian was formally removed from the company board and sent packing. People ask me if I feel bad about the immense risk I took that day. I just look at them and say, true power does not come from a fancy title or a cheap spreadsheet. It comes from knowing exactly which wire to cut and exactly which software license to revoke.